Welcome back to our Line Opinion panel. Now, over the course of 1 month, the New Mexico Department of Health conducted more than 6,800 unannounced in-person wellness visits, for clients receiving services through developmental disabilities waivers. Now, the DD waiver, we're going to talk about here in a second. Now, the checks flagged about 70 sites for reports of abuse, neglect, exploitation, or other more benign shortcomings. And Dan, you wrote a great article about this last week for the Albuquerque Journal. Can you start by explaining this system for us briefly? What is the DD waiver program and why does it exist at all here in New Mexico? What's going on with this?
Yeah, so the DD waiver program is a program to provide services and assistance to individuals with developmental disabilities, with autism, things like that. I mean, a lot of these folks are, still living at home, but their providers are a parent or another relative. For a long time, the program had a really long waiting list to get in. For years.
How long? I'm curious.
I don't even. I should know that, but it was
notorious.
Decades.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had the feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's been a concerted effort, especially given our revenue situation, to really try and get rid of that waiting list. I think, which good intentions to try to allow more people to participate. I think the pandemic then played a role too. Folks weren't able to go in the field and do their usual kind of checks and things like that. And then, what we saw about a month ago, apparently some pretty bad abuse cases, and we still don't know the exact details of those cases yet, but that prompted the Lujan Grisham administration to say, we're going to do these home visit for everyone involved in the program and make sure they're okay and check out the settings. And so I think there was a push to get this done quickly. To do that in a month is pretty ambitious. So the story I wrote last week, we heard reports from different individuals that some of the people who were showing up at their houses may not have necessarily had the training or the background in the program. And so it'd have people showing up at your door and demanding to be let in and to inspect conditions and to talk with the individuals. And
now these are DOH employees?
They're DOH employees, but other agencies as well. They've pulled
no
from other state departments as well. I've heard from a few state workers who were involved in this, and they were just told, here's your list of houses to go to, not given a lot of background, and you're gonna work as many hours as it takes to clear this backlog. And obviously, I think some of the issues that then resulted, maybe predictably, but folks showing up.
The question begs about the quality of the visits if you're not, that's not your thing.
Right, and my understanding, even some of these issues that were flagged, certainly there could be some serious abuse cases, but some of the other ones were, a defective fire alarm or things like that. And, even some of the state employees I've heard from, say they didn't know what to look for, what questions to ask, so even if there was abuse going on at a house, would they even know how to identify that?
Sophie, can I sway to you on that?
Yeah.
Do we know the kind of training these folks had to look for signs like Dan's talking about here?
Somebody knows, but that has not, to my knowledge, been released to the public, and so that's unclear to me. I think too just as struck as Dan was talking about, the vulnerability of some of the people who are on the DD waiver program, where something disruptive like a person coming in who they don't know, unannounced. I'm talking about the individuals who have developmental disabilities, how very disruptive that can be and may have been in these circumstances. And if the folks coming in don't have training in how to not exacerbate any issues that may already exist, that could have been quite counterproductive. I really understand and appreciate the desire to get this done quickly, but it does feel like it wasn't fully thought through.
Right.
And these reports are really concerning.
It's almost like a numbers game, Kathy, meaning, we did this amount, but how we did it isn't really not the issue, or the quality of the how. But let me go back to something Dan, I was mentioning with Dan. State Health Secretary Patrick Allen, quote, there is some training we do put them through before they do these visits. We're pulling people who have a familiarity with the program and possible signs of abuse. Are you buying that? I mean, how much training could one get in a short term to be able to recognize a very complicated thing like abuse? It's not a movie. People don't show up the front door with a black eye and say, I've just been hit.
Right.
You got to have some training in these things.
I want to preface what I say by saying that we need this program.
Yes,
it is very, very beneficial. If anyone has ever, been a caregiver for someone with severe developmental disabilities, you understand that this program is needed, the supports are necessary, and I recognize, as Sophie and Dan have said, that we did need to do the inspections. The problem comes with government programs where it's so reactionary. Like, we know that there's an issue now. We got to do these hurry up huddles and go say, let's get a whole bunch of people out there and say, look, we solved it. Not true. We needed to know that the people who are going into the homes have the ability to look at what's happening there and make a critical analysis of what needs to happen, or that this is a home that is, things are being handled well. And to have people showing up at the door who may not be trained is potentially detrimental to both the people in the home and to that staffer who's going out, who is not properly protected, who doesn't understand what they need to be looking for. And if they have given the kind of training that would be necessary, then please tell us what that was so that we can have the confidence to say, to support you, because we understand that this is a program that is very needed. Doing 6,800 site visits in a month, I think, maybe they probably showed them how to use Google Maps or, things like that, how to get to the house. But what did you do beyond that?
You made a point about reporting out. These people reporting out these 6,800 visits, and what do they say? I mean, there's all kinds of things here that just feels, Dan, like it's just, like Kathy mentioned, just a big push. And you spoke with someone who cares for her sister with Down syndrome. She said the state employee who showed up unannounced, threatened her. And what all did she tell you about that interaction? What was that all about?
Yeah, and I've now talked to a few other people who had similar experiences, and these employees showing up and maybe having good intentions, but their instructions were, you will allow us into the house to inspect, and and if not, threatening to call law enforcement, and especially if someone shows up unannounced on your, in the evening at your house, and you don't know for sure who they are and their identity, and I mean, I can understand the reluctance. I mean, this woman I spoke to said she felt like a criminal in her own home, and not knowing, exactly what they're looking for, or I mean, I can certainly see the trauma from that, and I can't remember who mentioned, but just that a lot of these folks do, I think, thrive on routine too, and to have that really upended, and disrupted, I think can be problematic. I even heard that, there may have been some visits by Spanish-speaking homes with state employees who don't speak Spanish, and so things like that, where it's,
I hadn't thought about that.
Just that language barrier, and adding kind of to that fear of what's going on and what's happening. So I think we'll see what happens next now that they've conducted this round of and there may have been some cases that should have been monitored more closely before, and I would expect we might see criminal charges there, but I think the way these were carried out, it does raise some red flags.
Interesting points there. And Sophie, back to those 70 residential sites I mentioned in the setup. 70 were flagged. Allegations range from possible abuse, of course, to missing batteries and smoke alarms. Drastically different offenses. Should the criteria for flags used by DOH be a little more nuanced to you?
It does feel that way, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, if it can be resolved with a trip to the hardware store, that's that's different than these more troubling cases. And it may be that internally the Department of Health does have a system for ranking those, but and prioritizing them, but again, not shared with us. And so we really don't. We don't.
Thank you for mentioning that. Oh, is it within our rights as taxpayers, whatever, to ask for some kind of reporting out on this? I mean, they stepped into this. It's not CYFD. DOH stepped into this.
Thank you for saying that. They did step into this, and it feels to me like they were unprepared to provide the level of transparency that the community, would ask for. It's, one of the things I was thinking about with the training issue is. We don't know what the training was. We also don't know what qualifications were necessary. So I mean, it kind of sounds to me like one of the qualifications was that you were already on the state's payroll. Okay, so that's step one. But what were the other things that were necessary in order to get these people out in the field?
Interesting. Danny, have you heard from others since your story ran?
I have heard. I've heard from a number of other providers, and like I mentioned, from a few state employees who haven't wanted to speak on the record, but who have shared some of their own concerns about how this was done and how the instructions or protocols were kind of shifting as the program went, which is problematic as well. The state did eventually start, when they're reporting the numbers, distinguishing between possible abuse and neglect and then these environmental factors. So they did make that change, but yeah, we still don't know exactly how, with the follow-up on those, and what's going to be done exactly to, I was told that they were all referred for further investigation, but exactly what that means.
Exactly right. Let's get real here. When people come to the front door, if there's situations like abuse, these kind of people are very good at hiding things, right? That's what they do. And so you have to have a very good radar for that kind of thing. You can't walk in with a training list of things and sort of watch for their reaction to questions. You got to know what's going on here. So I got to wonder if any follow-up coming up down the road on this. It would be very interesting to read, Dan. Thank you for your work on this with the Albuquerque Journal. It's really eye-opening. Good stuff there. Thanks again to our line opinion panelists. We'll meet back here in a little less than 20 minutes for our final conversation of the week when we react to the decision to drop the involuntary manslaughter charge against Mr. Alec Baldwin. I'll ask our panelists if they think it will ever be refiled.